So today we're focusing on whether artists could be the future of the high street. This is especially relevant in the Northeast at the moment through the development of the creative enterprise zones in North Tyneside, Newcastle and Northumberland. So feedback from previous War Culture events have meant that we've chosen to have fewer presentations with more time for discussions in the breakout groups and also together. So the discussions are based around three main themes. We've got creative enterprise zones. What kinds of mechanisms are needed to ensure creative enterprise zones / creative hubs embed within and grow the cultural ecology of the places in which they're located? How can the high street cultural hubs creative enterprise zones create the conditions to enable the cultural sector to stabilise and grow through and after the pandemic? Representative. What do we need to ensure that the development of creative enterprise zones are representative and respond to local need? And distinctiveness. How can rethinking the high street to counter the monotony of the same old high street stores draw on and develop local distinctiveness? Beyond creative enterprise zones or cultural hubs, how else can artists shape the high street? What is needed to enable this? So we're really lucky today to have Matt Baker with us. Matt is a board member of the Mid-Steeple Quarter. Mid-Steeple Quarter is a means for the local community to revitalise the Dumfries town centre by taking control of a group of underused and neglected high street buildings and refurbish these as a contemporary living, working, socialising, learning environment and cultural quarter in the heart of Dumfries. Matt has been a full-time public artist for over 25 years. He was the lead artist for City of Inverness in 2006 to 2010 and led the art strategy for the Gorbals estate in Glasgow, Gorbals Regeneration Project in Glasgow from 1999 to 2005. And Matt also leads on the Stove, the artist collective in Dumfries, which is part of the Mid-Steeple Quarter. So Matt, I'm going to pass on to you for the next 20 minutes. And then what we'll do is we'll come back for a brief Q&A and then we'll go into our working groups.
Thank you very much, Lila. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's really nice to be in Newcastle, if only virtually. It's always good to get out of Dumfries every so often. I think Leila did a great job of introducing me, but I just need to sort of unpack the context slightly of how I'm actually speaking today. So I'm here as a board member of Mid-Steeple Quarter, the organisation that's running the project I'm going to talk about. I am on that board as a representative of the Stove Network, which, as Leila said, is an artist collective based in Dumfries. So this is a story about culturally led regeneration and the sustainability or otherwise of this. It's important to say from the outset here, though, that Mid-Steeple Quarter is not an artist-led project. Rather, it was started by artists and the artists have built community support for the project, and the vision was then taken on by the community to run that project. So it's run by the community rather than the artists, but the artists work in partnership to help shape the vision as a creative quarter and get involved in individual projects. So off we go, or not. Yes. Okay. Quick background. I'm sure everybody knows where Dumfries is, being the centre of the universe and everything, but we're in the southwest of Scotland. We are far and away the largest town in the whole of the south of Scotland, actually south of Glasgow and Edinburgh, the Central Belt. With a population of 40,000 people, and obviously the regional capital of Dumfries and Galloway, which is the lighter shaded part of that diagram that you've got there. This is the beginning. This is our high street back in about 2012. We were a classic, well, to some extent still are, a classic clone town, in that Dumfries was big enough that national chain stores felt there was a big enough catchment So in the 70s and 80s, our town was bought out by large chain stores who were not interested in the sort of more delicate infrastructure of the place, certainly not interested in flats above their shops. They just wanted them as storage. So literally nobody lives in our high street anymore. And the shop units themselves were all extended. The chain stores wanted huge footprints, as big as possible. In many cases, they actually took out the stairs to the upper floors in order to increase the footprint on the ground floor. Then obviously with the death of the high street, out of town shopping, internet shopping, all of that, you had this kind of monoculture that started falling like dominoes, of losing those town centre shops. And then there was nothing to replace them with, and our community was basically left to clean up the mess of years of profit that was extracted by chain stores. Into that story in 2011 came The Stove, which is an artist collective. It was kind of like coming from a public art perspective. It wasn't a sense that we were exhibiting. It was more that it was that we would, as artists, host a conversation with the town about the future of the town. We have a 3-story unit with a community cafe on the ground floor and sort of production spaces up above. It's grown. I'll tell the story of what we did, but as it is now, it's grown to be a successful social enterprise that is providing regular employment for currently 41 local people. This is the story of that conversation. A number of quick projects to show you. This was a very fast social media project of trying to get people to tell us what the buildings would say if they were given a voice. People took a photo of a card like this, and we posted them on social media. This was a project called Square Go, where we drew out the main roads and buildings and the river, and we volunteers held conversations with passers-by about the town and the future of the town, and everybody got to sort of draw something at the end of those conversations, and over a couple of days we built up a picture of a new kind of town. This was Charter 14. That was we crowdsourced a new charter for the town from about 20 different community groups that we were working with at that time, each contributing one kind of element to the charter. We've done a number of these kind of like town meetings. This one was around transport, like putting together people's transport policy for Dumfries. And then, you know, after all of these conversations, we then continue the conversation using the building as a canvas, put up cards for people to contribute and tell them what the conversations were about, and also through social media. So it's hosting this town-wide conversation. The sort of outcome of that was a sort of the beginnings of a collective vision about what kind of town Dumfries wanted to become, and that was very much a mixed vision, rather than being a shopping precinct as it had been seen before. It was a vision that was mixed, that had education as part of it, had culture as part of it, had heritage as part of it, had a leisure, social offer, cafes, etc., and also obviously shopping and enterprise. But the key one for us was bringing people back to live in the high street. So what we did from there was to, frozen again, was to take that vision back to people to check it. We did this project called Chapter 1, where we sort of built a flat in one of the old shop units over a weekend. We had about 500 people through, and amazingly, I think 150 people sort of signed a charter a pledge rather to support the project actively. So what that vision became was a commitment really as a community to buy back our high street and develop it ourselves. I'm sure you'll be aware of the sort of community land ownership movement in Scotland, which typically is around islands or highland shooting estates, where communities have bought those back from absentee lairds. We were the first people to say in Scotland, we want to buy back our high street. We have absentee landlords who are owning the pension funds, etc., who own these properties. We want to take those back, and we want to own our high street.
We should stop doing that.
From there, the next question was like what was the right structure? How were we going to organize ourselves? And this is when Mid-Steeple Quarter was born as a standalone venture, as an independent community benefit society. We can talk a bit more about community benefit societies people want. Best way to think of it is almost like a traditional building society where you have members who are all part owners. And that was our vision, that the membership of Mid-Steeple Quarter would own this block in the high street. Is that and yeah, I'll talk a bit more about the benefit society in a minute. So this was the launch of the benefit society, and on that first day, on that first Saturday, we got 200 people signed up as the first shareholders of Mid-Steeple Quarter. And a board was formed. That's not all the board. There's a minister there and an MSP, but otherwise board members. And one of the sort of the key unique features of a community benefit society is that a community benefit society can put out a share offer, which means it's a way of raising capital from your community to do a development project. And then people get income from those shares. So you're basically putting the wealth back into the community, but you can set the conditions for when, that it wouldn't get a dividend, say, for the first 10 years, possibly it's a longer term investment. But again, people can ask questions if they're interested in the actual specifics of how that works. We were very lucky at that time to have our chair was a local planner. Who said we need to get into the local development plan. So we pulled together a master plan for the project, which was then duly adopted by the local authority. And that was a genius move in terms of like building that relationship with the local authority, who've been a great supporter throughout. This then is the area of the Mid-Steeple Quarter, and the high street frontage that you can see there are those 8 buildings that I showed you on that elevation. But what's really useful to see from this angle is just how deep the plan of those high street buildings are. So that you see this one at the top here, that's WH Smith currently, an enormous footprint built out by the chain store. But what that means is that by taking ownership of those buildings, we're effectively taking control of about 2/3 of that town block. And the vision for Mid-Steeple Quarter was to create a new town block right in the center of the town, which would then create its own energy and momentum and spread its influence wider in the town. So this is the master plan vision, which is quite a complicated drawing to look at. But if you start from the street frontage, it's retaining the original street frontage, and then basically carving out in the middle of that block a mixed development that on the ground floor is commercial units for a mix of community, creative, enterprise, cafe type use, and above that residential. And the calculations through the master plan are that through this project we can create 66 new 2-bedroom flats for affordable rent, which by a sort of ready reckoner calculation potentially brings 200 people to live in the centre of town, which will be absolutely game-changing from the point of view of Dumfries in terms of that evening economy, that kind of safety of the streets, and what we're looking at is building a mixed community. As landlords, the Community Benefit Society can control its allocations policy, and we're looking for a mix. Our survey material is showing the demand is from a mix of younger people and older people who want to retire and give up cars and be in the centre of town. So that the potential for that intergenerational community. This is a cut through of the ground floor, the sort of street level plan, which shows closes, as they're called in Dumfries, these alleyways, which is the traditional medieval footprint, bringing those back to life as alleyways full of this commercial activity, which gives it up to 50 commercial units, depending on the way it's sliced up, and some new public spaces in the middle of the block, and then with the housing up above. That gives you a sort of cut through sense of the sort of zoning there of that sort of makerspace, co-working ground floor, these courts, and the lively closes bringing that. That's the way that people remember Dumfries as being the closest, being where the life was. Around this point, we were able to appoint and pay for a permanent team. So Scott is our executive director, Laura, administrator coordinator, and Carolyn is our community engagement worker. Those guys are now running the project day to day, and the board has an oversight role with the executive team, and the board is appointed yearly by the membership. This is the plan that Scott's in charge of making happen. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, 2 and 3, phase 4, and phase 5. We're going to start by looking at phase 1, and we'll move into 2 and 3 in traditional order. So this was the first building that Mid-Steeple Quarter took ownership of through a community asset transfer from the local authority. 135 to 139 High Street, and this immediately after taking ownership, it was important to show that something different was happening. So this was a creative project that Mid-Steeple Quarter commissioned community was offered the chance to make 30-second videos, and workshops were hosted in order to do that. And then those were permanently showing in those upper windows through back projection. But it was like a jukebox, and you could select which videos showed by going to a website and picking 1, 2, and 3. And so you could actually control what was happening in the windows. And then classically, meanwhile, kind of activity, a mix of creative stuff and community, even sort of pop-up charity shops for local community organizations, etc., happening in the space before it was developed, and loads of community consultation that was going on around the literal design of the project as it was developing. And then this is some slightly confusing angle here. Can I go back? I can go back. If you look at the elevation here, that's on the High Street. If you imagine going down the side of that building, you can see a little close entrance there on the left inside the red square. if you imagine going down this close, that's the high street on the far right hand side. So this is the depth of the building that you're looking at in this long plot. And the way that the building is being developed as phase one is 350 square meters of creative enterprise space as an incubator, for another word for it, on the ground floor and part of the first floor. It's a co-working space on the first floor here. And then there's 6 new 2-bedroom flats, 4 in the block at the back and 2 onto the high street, with a first floor external courtyard that links all the accommodation, but is also shared with the enterprise space. That just gives you a cut-through view of the section of that building. You can see the first floor courtyard there, and the spaces that are orange and yellow. Those are the enterprise space, and that's on the left there. That's a sense of the enterprise spaces as flexible spaces that can be subdivided, and a nighttime view. This is where we are at the moment at Mid Steeple Quarter. Really, I mean, a lot of talk was that how difficult it might be to get landlords to sell to us or to negotiate purchases or force them into that. That was certainly the case we were finding prior to COVID. However, everything sort of like the floodgates opened somewhat during the pandemic, and Mid Steeple Quarter now owns 5 of those 8 buildings, the 3 in the middle there in green and the 3 that we're still in negotiation for. The one on the far left there is a slight anomaly. It's a single retail unit, which is part of that 109 building. So it's the one unit on the ground floor that we don't own, but we do own the bulk of that building. So that's the high street as it was a couple of days ago. So the first 4 buildings in that run there are now owned by Mid Steeple Quarter. And then the one that I've been talking about, 135 to 139, phase 1 development, is at the far right of that elevation there. And you can start to see that we're doing up shop fronts and businesses are moving in. So this is Flourish, which opened just before Christmas, which has 40 artists, makers, craftspeople who rent retail space collectively on that ground floor, working under the Guild in Dumfries. The middle floor is also is workshop provision for that project, for the Flourish project. And on the top floor there, you can see Lolly is in the loft. That's Lolly is a food photographer. In the meantime, the other buildings that were owned that we're not, we don't have permanent tenants in yet, but they're not a good enough condition to rent, but we are on the way towards development in the same way as phase 1. So they're in a kind of like classic meanwhile use situation at the moment, and very well used and demanded on by local community and creative sector in particular, and also the enterprise sector. Some of the work that's been going on the shop fronts, and then that's an important part of the ethos of Mid Steeple Quarter, is that we're using local people, and that there's this ethos of a kind of handmade quality, crafted quality, rather than plastic printing, kind of mass production. The figures on this are wildly out of date, but I thought it was the best diagram I could represent the kind of business model, if you like, of because the model is. I talked a little bit about community shares and the idea of that as being part of the way that we're raising capital. There's also a significant amount of grants. Everything that's been done to date in terms of the development of so the development of phase 1 is a 5 million development, which there's a small element of loan that we're taking out, but the vast majority of that is public grant of one form or another. Although it's important to say that the local authority to this point is not having to put capital in. It put some development money in at the very early stages, but the vast majority of the money has been brought in from elsewhere. And the principle is to attempt to do as much of that early development and purchase of property through grants, and then be able to go back to the community with a really substantial share offer and say, we've got this property behind us, help us develop it. And so you've got the running costs of Mid-Steeple Quarter, you've got the acquisition costs, you've got the redevelopment costs, and then you're starting to see the income coming in this lower range here, and you get the net income at the bottom here, which shows that by the end of this decade, the project should be self-sustaining. In terms of where we're going next, in the top left is actually a really nice project. That's a community plan that's been put together for the town centre, called Dynamically Different Dumfries, which is a mixture of, it's convened by the council, it's a mixture of community groups, businesses, the Chamber of Commerce, the tourism people, who are putting together this collective 10-year vision for the town centre. And a big part of that vision is the creative economy, entertainment economy, and the idea that Dumfries itself works as a hub for the region in terms of that creative economy, and particularly around the idea of creative placemaking, which is something that Dumfries has been pioneering. And then you see on the right there that idea of the Mid-Steeple Quarter and the town centre being this creative campus, if you like, a creative economy campus in the centre of the town. The project has been very well received, and it has been a subject of a number of case studies. Two of the most significant ones are on the left there, that's Power to Change, and on the right, the Carnegie Trust and their Turnaround Town. So if you want, this is really just skipping through things. So if you want a more detailed overview, those are good places to go, as is the Mid-Steeple Quarter website. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was it was absolutely wonderful to hear so much about the Mid-Steeple Quarter. Personally, I could ask you questions all day about this. There's been a few in the chat, and I'm going to try and boil them down a little bit. And also, what would be great is, Matt, if you could come back with us for the final discussion. And it might be that some more discussion happens at that point after we've gone into the breakout groups. I don't want to spend loads of time in the Q&A because I want people to be able to have time to have their discussions in the breakout groups. But loads of questions came up around this idea of working with the absentee landlords and also working with the local authority and with the council, and how easy all of that was to navigate, and what were some of the stumbling blocks, how did you get past them? And there's a question from Casper Dye there around the long-term preservation through the planning relationships with the council, and how some of that's been for you. Could you give us a little bit of insight into any of that, Matt?
Absentee landlords, actually getting in touch with landlords has not been so much of an issue for us. We have just persevered. There are a couple that are sort of quite obscure trusts. There's one insane situation where one of the buildings that we're trying to get hold of was an amusement arcade that went bust about 5 years ago. But the amusement arcade was bought out by a German multinational who are still quite happily paying the lease. So the building owner is sitting there with an empty building but getting 35,000 a year in lease payments from the German multinational, who are too big to even bother that's what they're doing. So I mean, there isn't a simple answer. One really useful bit, I think, is that we talk a lot in particularly in the Scotland England conversations about the community right to buy. that we have in Scotland. The reality of that is that I think it's 81% of community ownership projects actually have not had to use that community right to buy. The vast majority have been negotiated settlements with landlords, which I think, you know, has certainly been our experience so far. In terms of the local authority relationship, that has been excellent in many ways. Although, I mean, I don't know what other people's different experiences of local authorities are. I had our local authority was most memorably described to me as dealing with the IRA, in the sense of the fact that it's organized in independent cells, so that if one cell goes down, it doesn't take the whole organization with it. So that sense of like that siloed communication so we are working across the communities department, the regeneration department, the planning department. We work across a lot of departments, and we have a different relationship with all of them. But the challenge has actually been dealing with the economic development department, who don't understand the idea of community-led development, really. They haven't, it's just because they haven't had the experience of it. So they're used to working with commercial developers whose business plans are entirely different. And the way that we work on business plans, you know, then particularly when you're working around the creative industries, it's very, very rare that you're going to have a totally self-sustaining, but there's always going to need to be a little bit of public subsidy in there, because you're providing community benefit. And so it's like, it's that social enterprise model of how do you integrate a social enterprise model into a larger development proposal. And that's about education, I think, on the side of the local authority.